Hello, good people, and welcome to Hillbilly Cat History. Signed, sealed, remembered, Clambake versus Circle G. You've been with us for the last several episodes. You know that we've learned that Elvis is on the Circle G Ranch. And while he's there, there's a magazine that's been published in Australia to tell the Australian fans why he cannot travel to see them. Because he's making movies. Hi, Keith. Hi, Marion. Thank you guys so much for coming. Appreciate seeing you here. And today, we're going to explore Elvis leaving the ranch to make one of those movies, Clambake. This is why he said he couldn't go to Australia. And we're going to see what it's like when he goes to make this movie, which by this point in time, he just doesn't really want to be part of. Hi, Gunn. Thank you so much for coming. Hi, Pamela. Thank you so much for coming. Appreciate seeing both of you here. We're going to get started today with a song, and this is Threads and Dreams, and it's Elvis's dreams while he's on the Circle G. And when we come back, we're going to explore the beginning of Clambake.
Black pants in the sun, rode horses through silence, then golf carts for fun. A ranch just 10 miles from the mansion's bright gate, where the myth met the morning and time learned to wait. George fixed the brickwork, the pipes in the ground, lit VP on shirt where no spotlight was found. Donna kept diaries, snapshots ahead of a father who labored, of a myth made by man. He didn't ask for gold, didn't dream of a crown, just a place to be still when the world spun around. In the hands of the quiet, in the stitch of a scene, he carried the weight of a half-finished dream. The holster was worn, the leather was cracked, BP etched in thread, no glory attached. Mike shaped the saddle, the belt and the law, so Elvis could ride through a myth he adored. He didn't ask for gold, didn't dream of a crown, just a place singing still, that caress spun out. Feel the hang out the fight, that mistakes on the sea. We drained the weight of the hearts and his teeth. Snowstorms in March to fairgrounds at night. He chased peace in motion and shadow and light. And Priscilla saw him silhouette aglow, breathing in twilight, steady and slow. He didn't ask for gold, didn't dream of a throne, just laughter at breakfast, a place to call home. In the hush of the ranch, in the hands of the crew, they found what was real, and he gave it to you.
Thank you all for gathering here at Hillbilly Cat History, where we remember together and listen for the echoes. And today, we're going to explore Elvis leaving the Circle G. And we're going to hear first from Albert Goldman, who wrote a book about Elvis in the early 1980s. He was not a huge fan of Elvis. He got a lot of his information from Lamar Fike and other members of the inner circle, who Lamar got to talk to Albert. But just to remind us where we're at in the timeline, this is 1967. It's the very beginning, really. We're at the very end of February, and we're going into the beginning of March. And Elvis is at his Hollywood peak of 3 movies per year. He's been doing it for a while. Next year is going to come the big comeback special, and that's going to prompt him to go forward with the live performances in Las Vegas. And then in the 1970s, it says here that international tours finally happened, but that's not true. Australia was never realized like it says here. They hoped for international tours, but they never quite got to them. But all of these changes that we see on the screen here, these come about because he was at Circle G. And he did the reset in his mind, in his inner self, and he came out revitalized and ready to go take on these other challenges. But at the moment that he left to go do Clambake, well, he wasn't revitalized yet, and he wasn't ready to take on those challenges. And what Albert Goldman says is, there is no knowing how far Elvis might have carried this crazy binge if the Colonel had not succeeded in heading him off by negotiating a fast movie deal that demanded Elvis's presence in Hollywood by late March. Now, the reason that I've included this quote from Albert is that Albert is seen as like the first serious author to take on Elvis. His work is an academic work. All of his records are still stored at Columbia University, so they're still seen as high, academic resources, which they are. He's got tons and tons of interviews that were done with the inner circle and other people that were there. Hours and hours and hours of stuff that's on audio. And it's on the computer. It's all been digitized. So if you have a computer, you could access it, but only if you're a student or faculty from Columbia University. So if you happen to know any people that go to Columbia University that we can talk into giving us access to those files, that would be great. But right now, all we have is the book that Albert wrote. And the reason I've included this quote is because there are just so many wrong pieces in it that it allows us to understand that Albert he lacked vast pieces of knowledge about Elvis, and he made up things to fill up the book. And sometimes you've got to do that when you're creating, trying to fill in gaps in history. But Albert had a very poor view of Elvis, so when he filled in the gaps, it was always with the worst of thoughts, right? And so let's just look at what he says again. There is no knowing how far Elvis might have carried this crazy binge. Now, the crazy binge is referring to Circle G, the ranch, and the spending of the money. When Elvis spends money, people see it as a binge. You know, when regular people spend the money that they make, that's regular people spending their money. No one says that they're binging on anything. But if Elvis spends the money that he has earned, and is in his bank account on something, then if it's a large number, even though he earns a large number, it's now a crazy binge, at least according to Albert Goldman. And Albert claims that the Colonel headed Elvis off, which indicates that the Colonel had some kind of plan and did not approve of the Circle G, and therefore outthought Elvis in order to get him off the ranch. Well, that's a fiction that Albert has made up in his own head. Albert doesn't have any proof of that, because what he lists as proof is that the Colonel negotiated a fast movie deal, which is Clambake. Well, Clambake is not a fast movie deal. This wasn't something he negotiated on the spur of the moment. When Elvis bought the ranch, it was already known he was going to go need to do Clambake. He was already delaying Clambake in the middle of February. In order for the machine to have gotten that far, there's a Hollywood machine. In order to make these movies, you have to assemble people, the director, the producer, all the people who run the cameras and the lights. All of those people have contracts. And they all that paperwork has to be done, and everybody has to be lined up, and there's unions involved and everything. So this does not happen overnight. This is a multiple month process, even for Elvis's quickie movies. The pre-production done up front between the Colonel and the studios, well, that's not counted as part of the production time, and no one knows how long that goes on, but it's not instantaneous. So what we have here is Albert, apparently, although a very smart individual, an academician, a person who knows language and knowledge intimately, but he doesn't know anything about business, apparently, because he believes that this movie deal could have been negotiated quickly as a response to Elvis buying the Circle G. Can't possibly have happened, just cannot within the timeline. And Albert would know that because he's publishing a book. And a book runs on not the same timelines, but there are similar kind of production schedules. A book just doesn't jump off the printing press by itself. There's a lot of work that has to be done before it gets to the point where it even hits the printing press. Weeks and weeks and months and possibly years of work. Same with the movie. And Albert knows that. But he goes ahead and puts in his book that somehow the Colonel, and so that also adds to the legend of the Colonel's negotiating power. Well, even the Colonel can't negotiate like this. So this is just a false story. And it says that it demands Elvis's presence in Hollywood by late March. Well, that wasn't true. It was by the middle of February, but there's already been delays. So he's not going to get there till the beginning of March. And then Larry Geller. We've got a lot of people that are going to be in this story. So we're going to look at this Clambake, the untold story. And it's untold because no one's ever put all of these people's thoughts together. They're all out there, but they're all in a silo of their own, right? They're each in their own book, each in their own story. And when people talk about these, even like here on YouTube, when they put them onto videos and stuff, it's usually that one perspective, whichever one they happen to read or that they're trying to highlight. That's the perspective that gets told. But we're going to look at it all the way around. And Gunn is asking, why was Goldman so anti-Elvis? That's a good question. And there are varying theories as to why. But if there was ever a person that was the opposite of Elvis, well, that would be Albert Goldman. So everything that you think of as extremely positive about Elvis, it was basically the opposite with Goldman. And I mean, from physicality, from his looks, from his height, from his sexual orientation, from his thought processes. They were probably the same political party, but that's probably the only thing that they shared in common. And Goldman just could not stand Elvis. And I think it's because Elvis was so successful. Yet Goldman was only moderately successful within his own field. And Goldman isn't the kind of person that anyone would recognize on the street, right? He would never have that kind of fame. But that's just me giving an opinion about a man I really know nothing about and have never met. So you can't take that too seriously. And if you have an opinion on anything that we're talking about, I don't hold an Elvis degree. I'm not qualified to talk about Elvis in any way. So you feel free to put your opinion into the chat, into the comments if you're watching this on the replay. Make sure that you hit the like button, that you subscribe, make sure your notifications are turned on, and that bell doesn't have a line through it. And that's your best way for YouTube to hopefully tell you the next time I'm on live. Right now I'm on live every day, 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's going to be 24 hours from now. I'm at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Don't know what time it is where you are, but it's going to be 24 hours from now. We'll be back here telling more Elvis stories. And make sure you tell everybody you know that loves Elvis to come and visit us here at Hillbilly Cat History. And Gunn says that she remembers that Goldman's book was a hateful book. It does. It is filled with a hateful outlook, but it also has a massive number of facts and memories from people who were there. So you have to, when you go into that book, you have to push the Goldman aside, and you have to dig out the nuggets of truth and wisdom and Elvis that are really there, because it's there. But Goldman has, like baked this cake and then he's put this icing of Goldman over it. And it's a bitter tasting icing, frosting. So you got to cut through that and get into the heart of that cake. Because there is a lot of good stuff there. And there's got to be so much stuff in the archive that he has at the university. And I would just love to see that. I think that would open up this whole looking at Elvis history. Like, it would probably a lot of stuff in there that would bring you insight. Now, Red West is going to show up in these stories we're going to talk about today. And he also had a small part in Clambake as an ice cream salesman. Looks just a little bit creepy in this picture that I've brought up. And of course, it's a very blurry, I think it's probably a still from the movie itself, and it's just not great quality, but you can see that it's red. And that he does have a very red smile. And Pamela's saying it's 8:16 where she's at, and Lorna's saying it's the same time in Scotland and the UK, 8:16, 8:20. And Pat is saying it's 3:20 here in the United States. And so we've got a global audience, which is one of the great things about Elvis fandom, is that people from all over the world can get together to love Elvis. So this is Elvis's 25th film. He's doing this for United Artists. But it's a formulaic beach movie. And it's featuring Elvis as Scott Hayward, a wealthy heir who trades places with a water skiing instructor. But Elvis's heart and focus were elsewhere, because he's still back at the Circle G Ranch in his heart, where he's invested nearly $1 million to create his private sanctuary away from Hollywood's demands. And we've talked about how that million is probably split 50-50-ish between cash and mortgage that he owes on the ranch. So a loan that he'll be paying out over many years, possibly, because it's a mortgage. Could possibly be 30 years. And Linda's saying it's only 2:20 where she's at, so she's a little bit to the west of Pat and I. And Marion's saying it's 9:20 in Germany. And so Elvis has a conflict. It's about going back to Hollywood, leaving the Circle G Ranch, leaving his 163 acres, his personal paradise, which is really starting to take shape now. I don't think the trailers are there yet. I believe he orders those in early March. We've got to nail that down precisely yet, but I'm fairly certain that's early March and that they're in place in later March when he comes back. Now, Colonel Parker is busy negotiating, but it's not for this film. He's already negotiating the next film and the film after that. You got to keep this machine running all the time and thinking ahead if you're going to keep these movies on schedule and make 3 a year. On screen now is Elvis and Moon Lacker, Marty Lacker, whose nickname was Moon. And you can see in this picture from his forehead why Elvis gave him that nickname. But he's going to be in this story as well. And Larry Geller tells us that now that Elvis had the ranch, he was particularly reluctant to go back to Hollywood. He had spent an incredible sum of money on the ranch, probably close to $1 million, and during that time had put on an excess of 30 pounds. So even as Elvis is acquiring land, and he's acquiring all these trucks, and he's beginning to acquire these trailers, he's also acquiring pounds, weight, inches to his waistline. And we know that's because he's riding around eating entire loaves of bread straight from the bag while he's on his horse. And there's also been reports that he's been indulging in others of his favorite items. And we've talked about how this may be his body and mind rebelling against this idea of leaving the ranch. And he's actually, because he normally goes through a process to get in shape and lose weight for his movies, but this time he's going completely the opposite way. Almost as if he's trying to weigh himself down so much that he cannot leave the ranch. And he weighs himself down into that saddle, and he develops the saddle sores that Dr. Nick has to come out and treat him for. And Gunn is saying that it's 9:20 in Sweden. 9:20 at night. And Linda's saying that 30 pounds would be a lot. Well, I'm exactly the same height that Elvis was, 6 feet. If Elvis was 6 foot. Sometimes he's given a 6'1", sometimes it's 5'11". But he was probably around 6 feet-ish. So 30 pounds spread out over your frame, you get a belly. But it's not like you put on pounds all over your body. You're not... I don't know. When we look at the media today and I see someone that is overweight, it's much more overweight than 30 pounds, which is about where I'm sitting right now. So maybe that's just me not wanting to admit that I'm also heavy like Elvis was at this point. But he is he would definitely be pushing out of his waistline in the pants of his wardrobe, which would have been created for him. And it was definitely going to look like 50 pounds on screen because of the way that the lenses and the screens work. So this was going to be a problem for him, and he knew it. And he basically either closed his eyes to it or felt like he would just push through it and nobody would mention it to him once he got to the studios. Now, I think once he got to the studios, his lifelong professionalism kicked in, and that he was able to escape that and be on vacation, like right up to the minute that he walked into that wardrobe fitting and things went wrong. And Marion saying, wasn't he very thin before? Well, I think when he came out of the army, he was like 160. And then like when he's doing Kid Galahad and stuff, I think he's about 170, which is what they're claiming was his fighting weight, was 170, and what everybody says he's supposed to be at. And that's about what medical science says somebody that's 6 feet tall is supposed to be at. But when I see somebody that's at that perfect weight, yeah, they look very thin. And they are very thin. And if you've ever been to Graceland and seen some of the outfits that Elvis wore, even in the 70s, he's very thin. He's much thinner than you would think. Even during his heavy periods, he's thin. And so when he was right on top of it in the early 60s, right up to like 65, 66 even, I mean, he just looked great, and he was very thin. And Linda's saying that she watched the beginning of Clambake, so he must have lost the weight, or he just wears his weight very well. Well, there's a little bit of a combination of it there. Plus, he's got some great wardrobe people. I mean, these people that Elvis is worried about supporting, the ones that he knows are going to go without money if he doesn't show up, well, some of them are costume people. And he has fabulous wardrobe costume people. And they can do miracles. Because this is what they do. You know, they're professionals at it. And so I think there's a little bit of all of that goes into Clambake. And Marion's saying that she would eat 2 loaves of bread. If all I had was the bread, I'd probably eat the 2 loaves as well. But I don't think Elvis was stopping himself out there. I think he's taking this loaf of bread so that he can kind of lean into this gluttony of eating this bread. Now, he says he's doing it so he doesn't have to come back to eat. But other people are reporting that he's eating a bunch of other stuff too. So I think he got comfort from eating at this period. And I think we all do that from time to time. I don't think it's a big deal. And 30 pounds overweight, I don't think in a normal person's life, not a huge deal. But because he had to be on that screen, and there was so much money connected to it, now people were worried. And Linda says she thinks the leather outfit from the 68 special made him seem small. And Marion says that in 1970 he was extremely thin. Yes, he's totally on the top of his game in those 2 years. Totally. Like from 68 through 72. I mean, he's right there. He's loving it. And all of those pictures he looks great in during that period. But we can see from what they've told us in this history and that we've learned is that between every movie, and I think we can assume between every tour, whether it was at the hotel or tours out into actual stadiums around the country, that he would let himself go and get a little heavier, and then he'd shrink back down for the performances. So this was a kind of a yo-yo cycle that he was on throughout his life. And it's because he loved to eat. You know, that was one of the things that he really liked. And Gunn's saying that in 1970 he was perfect. And Joe Esposito says, I learned later that Vernon was telling Elvis to make the Hollywood movies because they needed the money. So Joe doesn't tell us how he learned that, but he says that there was a money issue. And we know that there's tension over money at this time because of the amount that Elvis was spending on the ranch. So I think there's truth to what Joe is saying here, that Vernon's worried about the money, and he's telling Elvis, sure, it'd be nice. We have more money coming in. Now, it doesn't make any difference, I don't think, if Elvis shows up to film this movie because the money's already been paid. Now, there could be money that has to be paid back and stuff, and there could definitely be terrible consequences, but I don't think any of the revenue streams are getting ready to shut off in any way. You know, so I think what Joe's telling us here is that it's not really about Clambake so much, it's about movies in general. And Vernon is telling Elvis something more similar to, if more contracts become available for movies, you should do those because they make a lot of money. You know, we need a lot of money, so the movies are the way to go. And that also indicates to me that Elvis and Vernon, and we know from what we saw the Colonel say in the magazine yesterday, Elvis and the Colonel, they're all having discussions with Elvis saying something similar to, I'm tired of the movies, I'm going to do something else. And he's not locked into what he's going to do yet, doesn't know what it is. That's what he's there on the Circle G trying to experiment and figure out, work through in his head. He's going to go in a different direction. And he's prepared himself for that. Colonel's already admitted, I cannot keep him caged into these movies much longer. And that there is a possibility of international tours after that, because who knows what they're going to be doing. But the Colonel's also indicating that he's not going anywhere as far as his own loyalty. He's going to stick with Elvis, because Elvis is the proven commodity. They're just going to be doing something else, but he's advising Elvis stick with the movies. Vernon is advising Elvis to stick with the movies. Those are probably Elvis's two most trusted advisors. So that's got to be weighing on Elvis. And so now we get to the moment that Elvis actually has to leave the ranch. And this is March 5th, 1967. It's a Sunday. And Gary Pepper, Elvis's friend, who lives in the house next to Vernon on Dolan Street, right next door to Graceland. Elvis often talks to Gary, and Gary is something like a conduit straight from Elvis to the fans, because Gary sends information that Elvis has given him to fanzines all across the world. And what Gary says is, Clambake for United Artists, filming at Universal Lot in Hollywood, California. Elvis left by jet plane on Sunday, March 5th at 7 p.m. My mother and I were at his home, Graceland, when he left. Elvis said goodbye to everyone, and his grandmother was the last person there that he said bye to. My mom and I were so touched by his goodbye to his grandmother. It was such a heartwarming goodbye between them. You can tell how very much they care for each other. Grandma could hardly keep from crying, but she always holds back the tears, 'cause Elvis can't stand to leave her crying. His dad, Dee, and the boys went with him to the airport, Natch. Mom and I stayed on and talked with Grandma Presley a while, and let me tell you, she's a doll. We always enjoy a visit with her. Now, if you've never heard of Gary Pepper before, Elvis met Gary Christmas Eve 1957 at Graceland, where Elvis's mother Gladys had invited Gary Pepper, who had made her a special scrapbook of Elvis clippings from newspapers and magazines. That's what Gary did for a living. He was confined to a wheelchair, and he had great difficulty moving any portion of his body. He had to be cared for all of his life, but he would collect these clippings, and with the help of his mother or one of his caregivers, they would type up short letters to celebrities and send clippings to them, explaining Gary's situation and that he was a fan and that he thought they might enjoy these clippings from Memphis, so that they would know how Memphis and surrounding areas that Gary was able to get the news from, how they felt about the celebrity. And many of those celebrities would respond with signed pictures and well wishes, and many times with funds in order to keep Gary going. And on Christmas Eve, 1957, Gary brought a white leather Bible with Elvis's name embossed on gold in the front, and he gave it to him as a gift. And Elvis didn't even know Gary, but he was touched by the gift, and that became the cornerstone of a lifelong friendship. Elvis hired Gary's father, Sterling Pepper, who at this point in time was working as a gate guard at Graceland and working the night shift at Circle G. So I don't know that he was working at Graceland at that exact moments when he was working at Circle G, because Elvis had split security force basically so that he could have security at Circle G as well. And so Gary really was a special part of Elvis's life. And we see it here in this, one paragraph missive that he sent off to this fanzine. And it tells us so many details about Elvis, that he left by jet plane on Sunday, March 5th at 7 p.m. So we have an exact time that he went to the airport. And Gary knows this because he and his mother were at Graceland. So they know what time Elvis left. They were there. And he says that Elvis, the last person he said goodbye to was his grandmother, who is Dodger. If you know any stories of Elvis and his grandmother, she had a nickname of Dodger, which they say he had given to her because he had thrown things at her as a child and she had dodged out of the way. Her real name was Minnie Mae Presley, and she lived at Graceland. And at this point in time, I believe she's living in the room that we now see as Gladys's room. So if you take the tour, or you've seen any of the pictures of the inside of Graceland, there's a room where the bed has a purple bedspread. That's Gladys Presley's room. I believe that was the room that Dodger lived in at this point in time. So Donna Presley put out a video, I think today, where she's talking about her favorite room at Graceland. And it's this room that her grandma lives in. And that Donna Presley would sleep the night with her grandma in that room. But that's the last person that Elvis says goodbye to. And it touches Gary and his mother. And the fact that it touches Gary and his mother, well, that's really the reason that Elvis is Gary's friend in the first place. Elvis sees in Gary a reflection of his own love for Gladys. And Gary is one of the last links to Gladys. He was there at that Christmas, which was Gladys's only Christmas at Graceland. And Gary tells us that it's always hard on Minnie Mae every time Elvis leaves to go across the country. And that she holds back tears. And then he tells us that Vernon and his family, including Dee and the three Stanley boys, they took Elvis to the airport, or went with him, but basically they accompanied him to the airport to see him off. And Gary says at the end of that, natch, N-A-T-C-H, which was slang in the 1960s for naturally, which apparently they used to say naturally a lot, that you would do this or that naturally. And it meant, I guess, that you should have kind of already known that. Or, of course, this is the way that it is. How could it be any other way? And they shorten that into natch. And you see it written a lot in 1960s era, late 60s, stuff like this. And it only lasts a very short time, unless you're a comic book reader. And then in the Marvel bullpen pages, it went like on into the 1980s, because Stan Lee, a big guy at Marvel, he loved to use that word natch. But I am getting distracted from the actual point of what we're talking about here, which is Gary's letter about seeing Elvis off. And he says that he and his mom stayed and they talked with Grandma Presley a while. And that they always enjoy a visit with her. And you got to wonder what they talked about, right? But he doesn't tell us. So we're always going to have to wonder, what did Gary and Grandma talk about after Elvis left to film Clambake? And Elvis flies from Memphis to Los Angeles with Red West, Marty Lacker, Billy Smith, Charlie Hodge, Larry Geller, Ray Sidon, who is Chief. If you remember our stories with Chief, if you don't remember those stories or didn't hear them, make sure you go back into the past episodes, because those are some really good stories with Chief. And G.G. Gamble is with them. Now, this source does not say that G.G. Gamble's wife is with them, but I gotta guess that she is. Could be wrong. I might be wrong. G.G. Gamble's wife is Patsy Presley, Elvis's double first cousin. So she is Patsy Gamble at this point in time. And Gigi works for Elvis. And they live on the grounds of Graceland, in a trailer out back. I say that, but I'm not actually positive that they lived in a trailer at this point in time, because Elvis is now loving the trailers that he just bought at Circle G. So I kind of wonder if Patsy always lived. That's an interesting question I'm going to have to look more into. But I know that in the 1970s, for sure, by the time that Earl Pritchett and his family, including Donna, are living at Graceland, that Gigi and Patsy are there. Hi, chillin' in Canada. Thank you so much for coming. Appreciate seeing you here. So this is Sunday that Elvis leaves, and he makes it to Los Angeles, Hollywood. And then the next day, March 6th, which is Monday, he reports to the studio for his wardrobe fitting. And this is the first official day of pre-production for Clambake, at least for Elvis. And Elvis meets with director Arthur Nadal and producers Arnold Levin, Arthur Gardner, and Jules Levy. And the studio, the wardrobe, and then Arthur and these producers, well, they're shocked to discover that Elvis is 200 pounds. And that he's 30 pounds up from his usual 170. And I'm sure this isn't the only time that this group of men has dealt with this particular problem. Not with Elvis, but with other stars. You know, weight issues were not uncommon in Hollywood. But Elvis has never shown up, you know, not ready to film like this. Because now they've either got to alter the wardrobe or Elvis has to find a way to lose weight very quickly. And that means they're going to have to rearrange some filming scheduling to kind of push his scenes further away. And they've already kind of been doing that because of a previous delay he's already made. Right? Because he's showing up late because Dr. Nick wrote the letter saying that he had the saddle sores and couldn't make it. But that same day, he completes most of the soundtrack vocal overdub that he had left to do from his earlier recording sessions. They were not completely finished out of Nashville, so he still had a little bit of work to do. And he records Confidence and Who Needs Money that evening at Thorne Nagore's Annex Studio, also known as Radio Recorders, in Hollywood, California. So he's a little behind on the music, but now he's all caught up, and he's ready to start filming, except for this excess weight. And Linda says, I didn't know Patsy Presley used to be called Gigi. I do believe she's still alive and aligned with EPE and double first cousin to Elvis. Correct, she's still alive. She wasn't called Gigi. Her husband was named Gigi. That was his nickname. I don't remember his real name off the top of my head, but everyone called him Gigi. And that's why I'm wondering if Patsy was with them. But I don't think she is. Now, we're going to see, at least according to Larry, which Larry has some very confused memories of this period. And we're going to see that. He indicates his wife is there at one point. However, the wives were not typically traveling with Elvis at this point, but they do travel to the next movie. Because by that point, Elvis has gotten married, and now everything is done in a married lifestyle. But this is the last unmarried trip. So it is only listing that men were with him at this point, and I think that's because they left all the wives back at the ranch and in Memphis. And Chillin in Canada is saying that the costumes were probably form-fitting. Yeah, they were tailored specifically to his measurements from his previous movie. So they could all, you know, that was part of the allure of using Elvis. You spent a lot to get Elvis, but you could go ahead and do a lot of the pre-production and be ready because he was doing so many of these. That was just part of the machine. You know, you knew that you needed to get the costumes that were to these measurements. You knew that you had to have this for his trailer. You knew all the specifications. It was very easy to work with Elvis. But now Elvis himself has thrown a wrench into it by not being prepared from a weight perspective. Now, if Elvis had just called him like 3 weeks earlier and said, I'm going to be overweight, I'm sure they'd have been incredibly angry about it and there would have been issues, but the costumes would have been ready. And so they would have been able to go to immediate filming. But maybe it's better that everything worked out this way. And Marion's saying that she's never seen Clambake, but she remembers seeing him in costumes that did seem a bit tight to her. And I think part of that is even during the short period that Elvis was filming these, I mean, these films didn't take very long to film, a few weeks. Regular feature films would take months. But even over that short period, Elvis's weight would fluctuate somewhat. And a lot of it had to do with he had no time to do any exercise or anything. And people like Arnold Schwarzenegger and his career in the 80s, you know, he was being put onto the screen because he had these giant muscles. And he kept those muscles giant by hours and hours a day of exercise. Now, we know now that all of these giant guys in the 80s, they were also using supplements of some kind or another that aren't legal today, but that's not the only reason they were big. You had to pair that with the actual workouts. And Schwarzenegger, during his movies, had a very difficult time having enough time to do the exercise. Now, he is a very strong-willed individual, so he really did commit himself to every moment that he wasn't doing the filming, he was exercising to keep up his bulk. That's basically what Elvis had to do to keep the weight off. He had to, you know, fight this battle all the time. And now you're in, I think we all know that when you're busy, you probably don't eat well. It's easier to eat things that are already prepped. Now, Elvis had the luxury of people that were cooking for him and that were preparing his meals. But they were doing it by what he would ask them to fix. And so I think a lot of times it's easy to fall into a comfort pattern and ask for comfort food. So, like when somebody else controls your diet, it might be that you actually eat much better. You know, if it's someone that cares about you and loves you, which Elvis might have been able to, you know, of all the responsibilities that he gave to others, that might have been one he could have given to someone like a cook. And he did have cooks that he loved. But I think for the most part, he directed what he ate. And so there was this battle between what he wanted to eat and getting into these costumes all the time. And it just had to be so much pressure on top of everything else that he did. It's just a massive amount of pressure. Every bite that you put in your mouth. And we saw him talk about that in the article where he says, I'm getting ready to eat this apple pie. And the producer comes by and he basically hints that Elvis may be overweight at that moment and probably could do without the apple pie. And Linda's saying that she only watched the first 15 minutes of Clambake, but he looked good. The cowboy jacket and slacks, so maybe it covered some of the weight. And Gunn's saying she's seen all the movies and never once thought about him being overweight. And I think that's a testament to Elvis's professionalism and the skill of his wardrobe people and his cinematographers, as well as the directors. You know, everyone worked to make Elvis look good, and he looked good, and that is what made those movies successful. And Sonny West says Elvis had put on about 25 pounds since his last film. While he got plenty of exercise on the ranch, doing chores and riding horses, he ate as he pleased, mostly his favorite foods. Hot dogs, cheeseburgers, bacon sandwiches, pork chops, chicken fried steak, cured smoked ham, deep fried peanut butter and banana sandwiches, cakes, pies, ice cream, and brownies. I don't know how much of what Sonny has said here is true, but he's made a very long list of a lot of stuff that it does sound like Elvis would have liked. And I think there's a good possibility he was eating all this kind of stuff during this period of time. And I don't think it's just February while they're on the ranch. I mean, this was happening, I think, from the moment he got back to Memphis in November, which was right around Thanksgiving. And then it was one long, continuous holiday. And the ranch just made it better. And he just kept thinking, I'll lose this weight before I go back for Clambake. And somehow this time it just didn't happen. But with that, we have reached the end of our current episode. But hello, Cassandra. Thank you so much for coming. I appreciate seeing you here. I don't think I've seen your name in the chat before, so welcome to the program. But today I'm going to leave you guys with another song. And we're going to come back in the next episode and we're going to continue talking about what's going to happen here at Clambake. Because you can see on the screen, on the slide, it says March 9th, Thursday, Elvis suffers a fall in the bathroom and he gets a golf ball size swelling. So there's going to be a lot of controversy about this particular episode of Elvis's life. You know, this injury that he incurs. And we're going to go through it all, what everybody says, piece by piece. And that'll be in the next episode. But before we get there, I'm going to leave you guys with a song that talks about Gary Pepper and a telegram that Gary Pepper wrote to Elvis and a letter that Elvis wrote back to him thanking him for being a friend. And until I see you guys again next time, you all keep on taking care of business.
The lights came down on Vegas gold. July heat, a crown retold. Applause like thunder, stars alive. One true friend was not in line. A telegram, a quiet grace. From 12 years deep, a loyal face. I read your words, they calmed the flame. In all that noise, I spoke your name. I wish you could have been here, Gary. The velvet night, the roaring crowd. But in my heart, your voice was steady. A whisper soft, a faith unbowed. 4 more weeks, this fire will fade. I'll find my way back through the haze to Graceland's porch where silence sings and friendship wears no stage or wings. The suits, the gifts, the famous hands, they cheered the king, they made demands. But in the mirror doubt would stare, and only you knew what was there. I wrote you lines in trembling ink, not for the press, not for the drink, just for the man who saw me hold beyond the glitter, past the road. Say hello to everyone, I'll be home when this is done. The curtain falls, the echo fades, but you remain my serenade. 4 more weeks, this fire will fade. I'll find my way back through the hay to Graceland's porch where silence sings. Friendship wears no stage or wing.